This is In-Ear Insights, the Trust Insights podcast. Do you want to use AI in your marketing, but you're not sure where to start? Take a class with Trust Insights and the Marketing AI Institute. The AI Academy offers more than 25 classes and certification courses to start you on your AI journey, including our Intelligent Attribution Modeling for Marketers certification. One membership gets you access to all 25 classes. Visit trustinsights.ai/AI Academy to learn more and enroll today. That's trustinsights.ai/AI Academy to enroll today. Are you struggling to reach the right audiences? Trust Insights offers sponsorships in our newsletters, podcasts, and media properties to help your brand be seen and heard by the right people. Our media properties reach almost 100,000 people every week, from the In-Ear Insights podcast to the Almost Timely and In the Headlights newsletters. Reach out to us today at trustinsights.ai/contact to learn more. Again, that's trustinsights.ai/contact. In this week's In-Ear Insights, let's talk about data forensics, both from the consumer perspective and from the marketer's perspective. So, Katie, you've got a bit of a mystery for us data detectives to solve.
I do, and it was one of those things as a consumer that took me aback a little bit. So even though, we run a data science company, there's still a lot about how data is shared that we don't necessarily have the answer for. So something that we want to start to pick apart is, so over the weekend on Saturday, I went to Walgreens, a local pharmacy chain, to pick up a hair care product. Not a product I had ever used, not a product that I ever talked about, not a product I had ever even known existed until I got to the store and saw, oh, this looks like the kind of thing I'm looking for. But I didn't go into the store thinking, I want this exact product. I've done some research on it. So there's a little bit of that happening. So I bought the product, I came home, and then on Sunday, I start seeing ads for it on Instagram. Now, my first thought is, how the heck does Instagram know that just 24 hours prior, I, for the first time, discovered and purchased this product? Now, I don't have a smart assistant set up on my phone, so I haven't been talking about it. There is a good chance that my phone is still listening regardless, but then I would have had to have named that exact thing in the course of conversation with myself, because my husband was working all weekend. So to me, it's just sort of a mystery as to how Instagram, within 24 hours, knew that I was in possession of this product. So Chris, what are you thinking?
Well, let's ask some questions. So the
Sure.
ad on Instagram, was it by Walgreens or was it by the hair company?
It was by the hair company.
Okay. And when you were at the shelf, did you notice that, was it a standard Walgreens shelf? Was there an electronic display? Was it an end cap? What was it?
It was your standard metal cold shelf. There was no fancy
no
display.
Cool display.
Mm-mm.
Okay. And what apps were you running on your phone at the time? You might not know that, but if there are apps in the background that were running.
I don't know what was running in the background at the time. I was listening to an audiobook. I was listening to Overdrive through my library, but I highly doubt that my library is transmitting hair care product data. Most likely things like, GPS and that kind of thing, but otherwise no apps that I'm aware of. And that might be the problem.
And did you use your Walgreens customer card?
I did. And that was my first thought. Yep.
Okay. So there's 3, maybe 4 different possibilities here. One, apps, particularly like Spotify, can transmit location-based data within stores back to merchants and vendors. They're very, very good at that. Their location data from a source that we have talked to can target you down to the aisle, so it can know what aisle you're in, and obviously based on that, what kinds of stuff is in that aisle. That's one possibility. Second possibility would be beacons, which are the NFC devices that a merchant would typically place in and around a store that track your movement either throughout the store or very specific aisles. So if there was a special cool display, there's a non-zero chance there's a beacon embedded within that display. You'll see this in electronic pricing shelves. Like if you go on to like Alibaba, for example, you can actually, as a merchant, buy shelves, have cameras and displays built right in along with facial recognition. and you can tie that to different merchants, and so the shelf can recognize you and change the pricing for you, like give you a discount or a promotion. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like the most logical thing is the Walgreens customer file. Obviously, every merchant with these loyalty cards shares that data, sells that data to other brands. And if you're seeing ads for it, what I'm wondering is, if it's just in the file, it's like, hey, you bought this thing, or you just bought something from this company, because normally when you get an ad for something you already bought, it's usually because a marketer didn't set up their advertising system correctly and is trying to sell you something you just bought, which is kind of a waste of ad dollars.
Well, and so that was the other thing I was thinking is, I've already purchased the thing. Why am I now seeing ads for it? So that's a whole other conversation about how improperly ads can be set up and the wrong messaging, depending on where they are in the customer journey. So to your first point about the location data through apps like Spotify, that actually makes a lot of sense, because I have previously seen ads for things that I was looking at or considering at other kinds of stores. When I was at Walgreens, I happened to be in the hair care aisle. They had no like fancy displays, and it's actually a much older Walgreens. And so I would have been less surprised if I had just seen general hair care ads, because it's a rather long aisle and there's hundreds of different kinds of products. But they were able to show me an ad specifically for the product that I purchased, which is what sort of, for me, raised my hackles of like, okay, someone sold my data, and within 24 hours, I started seeing ads for the thing. So I'm guessing, Chris, that your analysis that the Walgreens customer care number is the thing that tied me to this specific ad. What I was even more caught off guard by was the quickness in which it happened. It wasn't a week later. It was literally within 24 hours for this exact product.
The thing about the 24-hour delay tells me that it's likely the Walgreens customer number, because Spotify and other GPS-based apps, that data is near real time. Mm-hmm. So you could have been seeing, Instagram ads for that as soon as that evening, if there was, because what they're going to try and do, ideally, is target you before you leave the store. Like if you're listening to something on the radio, hearing that in the non-paid version would be a good way to try and save that shopping cart. If it's a day later, that suggests batch processing. Like you get a daily file from the vendor, and then they load that into their ad systems, and they spin up. It goes into the next day's batch. And to your point, if it had been a week later, that's something different. That's either the vendor gets much less frequent data files, or they are just really bad at running their own MarTech stack. But that 24-hour delay tells me it's probably a daily batch process, and then that gets loaded. And so from a forensics perspective, the thing that you would do next to test it is, I'm not saying go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff at Walgreens, but go and browse Walgreens without buying something one visit, and see if you see any new ads in your Instagram feed. If so, that tells you that it's not the customer data file itself. And then maybe do go buy a sample of some products that could likely be running e-commerce ads, and see if, again, those start to show up in your Instagram feed as well. And that will give you that sort of scientific test, like, yeah, there's some causality here for this, and there's not for these other things.
So, it's interesting. If we go back to Spotify for a second, I knew that they had the, you can break it down to very small geographic regions, and they know when their customers are either driving or traveling through certain areas. So I've experienced that before, and I've actually set up ads to that effect before. And that makes sense, because it's using your GPS information to say, you are in the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. Therefore, the vendor who has purchased ad space in the town of Framingham is now going to have you listen to these very specific ads. That to me makes a lot of sense. It was for me, a bit of the disconnect between having no awareness of the product and then starting to see ads on the product. I wonder if this is something that consumers are even aware is being done with their information as they're signing up for these, discount cards. I think that there's this lack of understanding that these discount cards are actually a bigger deal to the companies that are issuing them. So you might get like a $1 off or a $2 off coupon, but the company is getting much, much more in terms of rich customer behavioral data in order to develop new products and show ads and do e-commerce and, basically follow you everywhere.
Yep. So one of the other things to think about is who the parent company of the hair care product is, because there's a non-zero chance that, it could be like Unilever, for example, in which case that data file could be, sent to the parent company, and then it's shared down to, the individual units and things. So there's definitely some more forensics to be done there. But yeah, to your point about what consumers expect, the average consumer, I don't think has the slightest understanding of how ad tech works. And ad tech is obviously, it's a very lucrative industry. Obviously, it's a very competitive industry, and consumers give an awful lot of permission to things that they don't understand. There's the old Latin phrase, "Nolum gratuitum prantum," right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. So, as our friend Tom Webster says, if you're not paying, you are the product that is being resold. And I don't think that's a mindset that consumers understand with their data, which means that for marketers, we have to tread really carefully in how we use consumer data, how we acquire it, how we store it safely, and then how we use it, obviously. There are any number of landmines, going all the way back to the famous Target example of Target sending, maternity ads to a teen that, that didn't realize whose father didn't realize they were pregnant, where we can cause more harm than good, right? We can cause substantial reputational damage, and part of good governance around consumer data is disclosing to consumers in an easy way, like, hey, here's what we're doing with your data. If you don't consent, click here. It's like every website you go to saying, hey, we use cookies, click here to accept. And then, there's like some tiny little button says you can manage this. And then you open it up. It's like, here's the 44 things we do with your data. You're like, whoa, I only want this one here. And these other 43, no. But yeah, most people don't look at that. If you want actually a fun thing to test, would be to set up some event tracking on your website's pop-up, that manage cookies button, to see how many people actually click on the, manage my data. Like, I would bet you like maybe 1% of the people that go to your website do that. Everyone, the other 99% just click the OK button to make the thing go away, even though you could literally have said your firstborn child is now our property in there.
So let me ask you this question, Chris. So let's say you are like me and you signed up for example, a Walgreens card, maybe, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. And let's say you never, so you signed up for the card because you knew you'd get some additional discounts. Great, no big deal, 10 years ago. You've never logged into their website to manage your account. You just, on occasion, like maybe once or twice a month when you go to the store, they're like, do you have a Walgreens account? Oh yeah, I think I do. Let me punch in my phone number. And so you do that, and then you go about your day. And so I've never checked in to see, in the 10 years that I've had this account, has the privacy policy changed? Has my end user agreement changed? Is there even a way for me to manage this information? So why am I so caught off guard that all of a sudden they're selling my data and I never said it was okay? Because it's on me. I never checked to see if that was even something I was signing up for, or if that has changed in their policy in 10 years.
So you're getting at why GDPR and CCPA exist, these legislative requirements for marketers, because in a lot of cases, people don't know. They might have given a phone number, they might have given an address, and the company has likely done the minimum due diligence required, which means that they probably sent a postal notice or an email that ended up in your spam bin saying, here's how our privacy policies have changed. You almost certainly got notices about this at the beginning of this year when CCPA took over, because every company did the whole, we all got these notices in 2018 when GDPR went into effect saying our privacy policy has changed. You got 500 of them all at the same time. for every company you've ever done business with. And what did you do? You probably put them all in the trash, right? Because
that sounds about right.
Read these.
Yeah.
But implicit in that is you were given notice and you didn't read it. And so you're correct. The burden of responsibility for managing your privacy is on you. However, as marketers, we have to be cognizant of the fact that even if we've made it, we've done the regulatorily required things, that is different than doing something with a consumer that has active consent. And that's one of the topics that keeps coming up in privacy legislation is active consent means, yeah, you actually read the thing. You went through the 2-minute tutorial or whatever, and you clicked OK knowingly, or you took a quiz and it says, yes, you actually read the thing. In those cases, companies are a lot safer from reputational damage because they're like, well, yeah, you watched the YouTube video to the end. We can watch that. And you've agreed knowingly what you were getting into. And I think from a best practices perspective, we want that. We want active consent for our stuff. We want customers to know what they're getting into. And if we're selling their data, we tell them, what's in it for them. Like, hey, I'm going to sell your data to this hair care company. In exchange, you might get some extra discounts on the hair care thing. Do you agree? And if the customer says, no, I don't want discounts, cool. If the customer's sure, I'll take an extra, 20% off, then they get to make the exchange. This was something that one of the presidential candidates, Andrew Yang, was big on, was saying that customers should have the right to sell their data instead. Like the company is not permitted to do it. The customer is the one who says, yeah, you pay me 30% off your product and I'll give you my data kind of thing. Or you give me $1 for every time I click OK on the consent button. And it's an interesting idea because it would shift the economic burden to the technology providers, to the marketers. I don't think it will ever happen because companies are not going to be willing to pay that. But certainly with things like GDPR, it's going to make a patchwork quilt of privacy. And so our guidance always to marketers is make sure your privacy policies and things adhere to the strictest standard. And then you never have to worry about whether you're compliant or not.
You bring up this notion of the active consent, and I feel like we've talked about this before, probably on a different podcast. But I can absolutely see why companies would want to do the bare minimum and sort of like skirt around this notion of active consent, because it's not in their best interest to not have complete access to consumer data. So if they are putting privacy policies and consent forms and tutorials in the face of their consumer, the likelihood of them getting the data starts to go down considerably, because a lot of people are saying, well, no, I don't want to share my data with you at all, ever. I want nothing to do with discounts. I want nothing to do with you knowing who I am, my purchasing patterns, my likes, my dislikes. I want nothing to do with that. So you get nothing. And then that puts the companies at a severe handicap. And as I'm saying this, I realize we have had this conversation before on a different podcast. That said, it's still such an important topic that it definitely bears repeating, because as it gets increasingly more difficult for companies to get consumer data, they have to then think of other ways to reach their key demographic in their market. And you're going to start to see the companies that are less creative, less agile, less innovative just start to fall by the wayside when it comes to digital marketing.
Yep. And the other thing is, as awareness properly becomes greater about the misuse of data for things like AI and creating unintended biases, there's an additional disincentive for you to tell a company who you are, what your preferences are, because you can obviously infer things like race and religion from those data points. So yeah, there's a strong disincentive to want to share that data, which means that as marketers, we have to figure out, okay, what is a strong enough incentive to get somebody to want to share that data. If we agree that data is valuable, which I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably agree with that, then what are we willing to pay for it? What are we willing to give for it? What's in it for the customer? And in a lot of cases, there's not enough. There's not enough in it for the customer to go, okay, I think this is worth forking over my data and potentially even being exposed to a hostile algorithm down the road, depending on the company. So the takeaway here for the marketer is you've got to decide what customer data is worth and then be willing to pay it, and be willing to pay a premium for it, because as legislation continues, as privacy groups get better, as consumers get better at understanding how their data is and is not being misused, you will be in competition with your competitors, not only for the sale, but also for the right to the data. And you would better be able to outsell your competitors on the value of what you're going to give them in exchange for this data. Because it's, Katie, to your point, it's a sale. It's just like buying the product itself. That giving that data over is a sale. And we as marketers have to convince people to sell us their data.
I agree. And, as being on both sides of it is really interesting. As a consumer, in some ways, I almost felt completely violated of, how dare you know the thing that I just bought and then show me ads for it. But as the marketer, I'm like, oh, this is great. I have access to consumer data. And so it is definitely that like push-pull of, I don't know which side is the right side. So there has to be that middle ground of the consumer actively knowing and the marketer actively telling.
Yep. As with so many things in life, consent is everything. Get somebody to say yes, and you're all good to go. If you got follow-up questions about this or any other topic, pop on over to our Slack group over at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you can talk with over 1,300 other marketers about topics like this or anything else under the sun that's related to marketing analytics. And if you haven't already subscribed to this show, please do so. Go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, or just subscribe on whatever platform it is that you're listening on. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Want help solving your company's data, analytics, and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.